the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the Rated R radio star, here for, well, this is something a little different and something I've wanted to do on Patreon for quite a while. And, well, actually, honestly, okay, what I'm about to do, all right, this is a book review. I wanted to do this on the Prime episode this past week, but we ended up having the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy on, the woman of tomorrow. And so because of that, she didn't read this book, so I didn't want to just have her on and talk for 15, 20 minutes, whatever, about this book. But this is a very important book, and I've wanted to do book reviews, more in-depth, spoiler-filled, warning, spoiler-filled book reviews on Patreon for a while for, fiction and nonfiction. This one will be fiction. I would have ended up doing it in episode 268, which is coming up next. But I promised for that I would do a review of the Area X or the Southern Reach trilogy, depending upon what you want to call it, which is the book series that the recent movie Annihilation was based off of, or at least the first book in the series was based off of that. And so I've been going through that, and because of that, again, I don't want to have to push that back any further. And there's already stuff planned throughout March of what's to be released, who's going to be on the show, etc. So really, the only place that this can fit in is as a Patreon extra. But that's the joy of being a Sovryn Tech patron, right? You get all the goodies. And also, and I don't know how many times these are going to necessarily coincide, but when we did the February live Hangout Q&A, towards the end of it, people requested, and then on Twitter, other people requested, etc., to have a Sovryn Tech book club of sorts. And what I've done is now that the Sovryn Tech newsletter is just monthly instead of biweekly, I am compiling at the end of it, as part of the newsletter, I'm compiling all of the books that I read that month, and also the books that either Stephanie or Ellen have read, that I know of anyway, that I'll put into there. Ellen actually recommended this book to me. We were having dinner and we were talking, and however the conversation came up, that she said, she's like, you ever think about broadening your horizons and what you read and everything. And I was like, well, I read a pretty broad scope, but sure, I'm open to trying that. And we talked about it. And first I'm like, okay, I'm not reading Nora Roberts, I'm not reading Danielle Steele, or Danielle Steele. But give me something. She says, okay, how about This Perfect Day? And I'm like, oh, what's that? I had no idea. And she, I just pretty much, anything Ellen recommends to me, I just go for it sight unseen. I'm like, all right, I'll, give it a shot, whether it's a, I don't know, movie, an album, whatever it ends up having to be, something, something I'll check out. I just trust her all the way. And so I was like, okay. And so, as soon as she said it, I had my phone next to me and, at dinner, and I ordered the book on Audible right away, because the audiobook version anyway, I couldn't readily find. Actually, I couldn't find the ebook version either, on any kind of torrent sites or anything later on, but whatever. I ordered it sight unseen anyway. I had some credits in my Audible account anyway to go through that I was loading up for when all the new Han Solo books are supposed to come out for Star Wars, coming in May. Actually, the first one of that I have pre-ordered. It's coming in April for, was it Last Shot for Han Solo, or for Solo, a Star Wars story? They really should have called the movie Han Solo, but whatever. We're not here to talk about that. Anyway, so Ellen recommended this, and I started reading it like the next day, and she and I were walking around, and I was like, there's a poem in the book, and I started quoting it to her, and I was like, wow, I'm not that far in, but this is already a hell of a book. Now, it's written by Ira Levin, and it came out originally in 1970, so this is an older book. It really, Ellen and I were talking about broadening horizons, but it is a science fiction book, a dystopian work anyway. And it is a science sci-fi dystopia styled book. So it's not exactly broadening my horizons, but I am so glad that she recommended this. I guess we'll start out talking about it. First off, Ira Levin, who he would end up getting a Prometheus Hall of Fame award for this book in 1992, so 22 years after it came out. Fortunately, Ira Levin was alive. He died in 2007, was alive to accept the award. Now, Ira Levin is probably best known for writing the novel Rosemary's Baby. Of course, he also wrote the sequel to that, Son of Rosemary. And Rosemary's Baby, certainly the movie, is one of the all-time classics, and a film that I think there's a lot to extrapolate from that movie, not about the movie itself perhaps, but perhaps about the real world. But that's another conversation for another time. So Ira Levin is certainly a master of his craft. One of the great authors, no doubt about that. I mean, certainly, I think except for this book and Son of Rosemary, every Ira Levin book has been converted to television or a theatrical film of some kind. I mean, that, there's something to be said if you're that damned good. So certainly you're not wasting your time in reading this book. And again, we are going to get into spoilers. But that might not matter so much. You're not wasting your time if you read this book because you're going to be reading great prose anyway. Not that somebody, getting films made out of their books necessarily means that the book or that the person is a great writer. Like I would argue that, the writer of the Twilight series is actually a horrendous writer. And I'm not the only one to say that, but she ended up getting, so many movies and obviously has done very well for herself. Same with things like 50 Shades of Grey and others. But back in the day, certainly back in the 70s and 80s and etc. I mean that is you really had to have something kind of going on for you to make that or to achieve that with your novel work. But it's important to bring that up, I think, because This Perfect Day isn't the most original piece of fiction. Okay. It's very well done. It's very well developed, I think, more or less thought out. I mean, like maybe it's a little weak on what makes up the philosophy of this. Well, again, it's a technocratic dystopia, maybe more specifically, and it has to deal with a utopian world that, of course, is actually a dystopia. Very much in the vein of, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and books like that. And that's the thing. That's where this doesn't exactly feel so original, because it does smack certainly a lot of Brave New World. That doesn't mean that, just because it feels like that, I still think it's an important work, partly because, especially in 1970, for a lot of the ways that this gets updated, where instead of in Brave New World, there's a lot of what's controlling everybody has to do with chemistry and things like this, because, computers weren't a thing, back when Brave New World came out, as to where, much of the central villainy and malicious or malevolence in this book comes from really a room full of servers, what's called Unicomp in the book. Now, hilariously, around this same time, there would actually be a computer company that mainly made like computer accessories, keyboards, things like this, also called Unicomp. So don't get them confused. But Unicomp, or what gets shorthanded to Uni throughout the book, throughout the novel This Perfect Day, is just that. I mean, it's this, and this is a popular concept at the time as well. You can think of a few different films that would use this idea of a central computer. I mean, even before Terminator was a thing, this idea that there's this central computer that controls everything, and causes all kinds of problems, whatever. So that is in many ways kind of the central villain here is Unicomp. But you find out that it's more, well, again, we're getting into spoiler territory here, but it's more the programmers of Unicomp that are really the problem. But let's describe a little bit about this supposed utopia, which again is really a dystopia. There's not a whole lot of explanation to exactly where this is. I think there's some mention of it being near the Carolinas, perhaps, or something like that, because there's a point where someone wants to do trade in tobacco. Not that tobacco is allowed in what. So Unicomp controls like a huge chunk of the planet Earth. Okay. And it has all the people, the humans that live under Unicomp are called the family. Okay. And, individually they are family members, but it's this idea of the family. And They are controlled by drugs that they get monthly, be it transdermal spray or some kind of like jet injection. And these treatments are varied based upon the person who takes them. But bottom line is that, I mean, and this is where it feels like if you've ever seen the movie Equilibrium with Christian Bale, tremendous film. Unicomp, or This Perfect Day, really, Equilibrium was almost a shot at making, I think, This Perfect Day into a film. Still a fantastic film to watch, and this kind of message of what happens when you start to dumb down perhaps the emotions or try to control the human condition and things like this. These kinds of films need to continually be made. Okay, dystopia doesn't always have to be like zombie media or things like this. Like Walking Dead or some other bullshit. But anyway, so it's controlling kind of human emotions, keeping down the desire for violence, perhaps, and anger and things like this. Also, as these children grow up, the lead character his nickname is Chip, which he ends up taking on more of his full name. His actual name is Lie, and then followed by a bunch of numbers. One of the interesting things that you discover, with the book early on is that there's really only like 4 or 5 different names for each gender, male or female. And you just have a bunch of numbers after it. And in that sense, it almost, and certainly there's other parts of this where it almost feels like, because people can't live past the age of 62, that's part of the drugs that are taken monthly. It's part of it. But anyway, that's where it feels kind of like William Nolan's Logan's Run, right? Or the movie Logan's Run, another very important film, in my opinion, to check out, and actually a pretty good trilogy of books too. But the movie certainly stands out as just, in my opinion, one of the best science fiction movies ever made. But in Logan's Run, you can't live past 30. In this case, it's 62. And in Logan's Run, there's no really control of sex. And that's the point I was going to get to, is that when these kids get to be teenagers, it almost feels like Brave New World's The Feelies, right? Where they have like these seeming orgies almost. There is once a week you pair up with somebody in under uni in the family. You pair up with somebody who, not family as a nuclear family, there's not incest in this, but anyway, you pair up with somebody and you have sex for 10 minutes once a week, and that's how it's programmed. And when you're ready to have a baby, perhaps, like Unicomp is controlling, who you date, when you have kids, all this different stuff. Part of the drugs, the injections, are what allow for or what control birth as well. So that's a part of this too. And the idea that, and everybody's like really happy and they love when they get to have sex for just 10 minutes and they orgasm and everything once a week. This becomes part of, so you have the character of Chip, who you find out I don't want to give, there's no need to cover the entire story, because it's kind of a simplistic story, even though it has a lot to say. And I think a lot of it smacks of being very, very plausible for the future, where you have programmers, which is something that I warn about on Sovryn Tech all the time. You have this real corporatist system where you have various programmers tossing everything onto servers, and the servers are going to decide. This is like, basically, this is smart cities taken to what I think is their logical extreme. Okay, in this book, where everything is being controlled by the central server, etc. So anyway, Chip, the main character in this, he has a grandfather who, the grandfather, apparently this dystopia, or this technocracy that everybody lives under, hasn't been around for too long, because Chip's grandfather, it knows what life used to be like, where there used to be a ton of different names. He also helped put together Unicomp, as in, at the very least, he helped set up the server farms and everything. And so when Chip is young, he is taken to visit Unicomp. It's this very exciting thing, almost a rite of passage that kids get to go through and that families do. And when he goes with his grandfather, as well as the rest of his family. And when they go there, there's Unicomp is this really, everything's all these pretty pink boxes and everything, and it's all beautiful and whatever, and it's lots of fun, and you get warm feelings just being around Unicomp, because it all feels so loving, even though it's just a computer, right? Well, his grandfather says, hey, you want to really go see Unicomp? He says, all that? He says, that's just for show. That's not really Unicomp. And so they sneak away together to like many floors below where Unicomp actually is. You know, maybe it's like this mountain area. And they go down a couple levels, and his grandfather shows Chip, this is really Unicomp, and it's all very cold down there. They have to put on blankets to cover themselves. And there's just rows after rows of these, you know, very, you know, to say it metaphorically, these cold machines, you know, just these servers everywhere. And his grandfather's explaining, he says, oh, and there's even more than this, you know, like it's all over the place. And Chip's like, wait a minute, well, this doesn't feel good. Like, this isn't very loving. This all seems, you know, kind of scary. And this experience and constantly talking with his grandfather, who keeps, like, Chip keeps saying in his head, he's like, my grandfather says, oh, isn't this wonderful? But he always sounds sarcastic. Like, actually, everything that's going on around us isn't really wonderful, but he claims that it is. And this sort of sticks with him. And later on, Chip, you know, at some point meets these 4 or 5 other people who you find out are rebellious, and they have figured out how to like lessen the drugs that they get so that they have more autonomy, more individuality, and whatever. And one of the ways that he kind of gets seduced into hanging out with this group of people is there is this character. Her name is Snowflake. There's also another woman in the group. The group it's 2 guys and 3 women, and well, it ends up being 2 guys and 3 women, because so originally it's 4, and Chip ends up making 5. There's Lilac is one of the women, and then there's Snowflake. And Snowflake at first is the person who pairs up with Chip. And when they're explaining what it's going to be like to, you know, kind of break free from the hold of Unicomp and the drugs and everything like that, and this is like right in it's part 2 of the book, chapter 1, so it's fairly early on in the book. Okay, and this is the part that like got me hooked, where I was just like instantly I'm thinking, oh my god, this is awesome. And that is, Snowflake says to Chip, you know, look, once you get off of these drugs, because Chip, because of his influence from his grandfather, is always kind of this rebellious character and is constantly questioning, you know, whether or not uni is a good thing and all of that. So when he meets others, you know, anyway, how they kind of seduce him into joining their group is Snowflake, who is this beautiful woman, says to him, you know, once you're off the drugs, we can actually have sex every day, and not just for 10 minutes. You know, and they say the word fuck like all the time. Like, we can fuck, you know, all the time. And I, as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh yes. Because I love the fact that with this future, not so much with Brave New World was this the case, nor was it the case, I think, so much with a lot of these other ones like Equilibrium. And it wasn't, and it's certainly not with Logan's Run, which is a very hedonistic technocracy. But in this, where sex is very much a part of the rebelliousness, you know, and rampant sex is part of the rebelliousness and the expression of individuality in this book. And so that, obviously for me, I mean, that just instantly turned me on. And I thought that was so cool, and that it's such a big part of the importance of getting away from being controlled by Unicomp and, what you find out later, the programmers. And so, you know, like, as soon as I heard that, I was like, boy, it's like, I wonder if Ellen had some, like, subconscious, because, like, she's talking to me about broadening my horizons. But then as I'm reading this book, I'm like, oh, this book's tailor-made for me. Like, I was talking to Stephanie about it. It's just like, well, it's the perfect book for you. I'm like, yeah, exactly. So, anyway, yeah, so I enjoyed, you know, once it gets into that part, you know, I really enjoyed it. Anyway, so it gets to a point where this group of people, this group of you know, intellectual rebels or individualistic rebels from the family and Unicomp, they end up discovering, and really you find out one of them already knew this, but Chip ends up discovering through them that there are places on Earth where people don't live under Unicomp and people are more or less free, etc. And so he wants to go find these things. You also find out, and this is a part that doesn't get fleshed out or explored much, you find out that there's whole, you know, the solar system's been colonized. Like there's there's a colony on Mars, there's a colony on all these other parts of the solar system. And you don't really find out much about what goes on there, though maybe they're all under another version of Unicomp as well. I mean, that's not really explained. But bottom line is that there are parts of the Earth, there's like these islands and other places that you find out about, where Unicomp is not in control, and there's whole societies there. But before you find out about that, the group that Chip is a part of right now, with Snowflake and Lilac and this guy named King and others, ends up getting caught. And 3 of the members end up getting killed. And the only 2 left are Lilac and Chip. And Lilac is... So Lilac is kind of a love interest, is originally a love interest for another person in the group, but Chip keeps having like all these thoughts about her, and he starts becoming like, honestly, he becomes like obsessed with her breasts and everything. I mean, it's all kind of fun to read. But they end up getting reprogrammed and re-put into society, into the family, more or less. And they end up getting drugged up again and whatever. And the book goes into part 3 at that point, and then it's about Chip kind of breaking free again, and then going to free Lilac as well, because he just can't stop thinking about her. And then he has another friend involved. But anyway, they end up getting away. They end up going to one of these islands, one of these areas on Earth where they can be more free. And when they go there, instead of it being very much the technocratic, almost communist way that you live under Unicomp, it's more of a capitalist. There's money, and all this stuff. It's more of a capitalist system that they end up running off to. And eventually Chip just comes out and says, we need to put down Unicomp. And in his attempt to do so, he gets everybody together. He has a plan and everything. And the reason that he can uniquely pull it off, because other people from these areas haven't been able to pull it off, from these free areas that have tried to. The reason they were never able to pull it off is because they didn't know that Unicomp was actually levels below where everybody thought Unicomp was. But he knew that because as a kid, his grandfather took him down there. And so they go for this, attack on Unicomp to try and shut it down and everything. And they end up getting captured. Or Chip does. Lilac doesn't go with them, but Chip gets captured, as well as his other friend. I think was it Chad or something. And the thing is that because they were able to get so far, they actually get brought into and offered to become programmers as well. Like they end up getting to become part of the elite, just because they almost put an end to the system. And you find out, so there's this phrase that keeps getting said when you live in the family, when you live under Unicomp, and it's Christ marks wood and way. Instead of saying, oh my God, they say Christ, or they'll say like Christ marks wood and way, or they'll say Christ and way. And there's actually like a full poem to it, but it's, Christ marks wood and way led us to this perfect day. Marks, wood, way, and Christ, all but way, were sacrificed. That's an important part of this whole thing. Wood, way, Christ, and Marx gave us lovely schools and parks. Way, Christ, Marx, and wood made us humble, made us good. And that's the poem. But that's where the title "This Perfect Day" comes from. Is that the claim is that there's like this philosophical trail that's followed that goes from Christ to Marx to wood to way, which ended up creating their quote unquote perfect technocratic society, under Unicomp. Now, you find out that way, once they get captured and they meet the programmers and they end up being offered to become one of the programmers, you find out that Way is actually still alive. And the Way is in WEI. And Way he's been alive for a while and is literally like his head is getting transplanted onto youthful bodies. That's how he's still alive. And you find out that Way actually created more or less this whole process of how you get to, among the what within the family they call the incurables, which are the people that live outside of Unicomp. Yeah, I mean, when you're in the family, you think they're mad, but when you get to the reality of it, you find out they're just kind of rebels and everything. But and that's kind of the reality that Chip would end up discovering, with his original group of friends that we're getting away from the drugs and the treatments and everything. So, but you find out Wei actually set up this whole thing, and if you can get to more or less, if you can get to Unicomp, if you can get to where you potentially destroy Unicomp, that is the test for how you get to become a programmer and carry on the legacy of Unicomp. So Chip obviously wins this, and and Wei is really impressed with him and kind of feels that, okay, you're one of the ones that's going to be, you're going to like sit on the high council, like you're going to be a really big deal. But Chip never fully buys into this, even though they kind of try to seduce him and how great it is. Like his first night as with the programmers, he ends up getting to sleep with 2 women instead of just one, and normally, and obviously it's not just for 10 minutes, and there's even like that Wei has made them kind of subservient and whatever else. So there's all kind of problems with that, but it ends up that Chip doesn't accept being a programmer, and he pretty much finishes his mission in destroying Unicomp, and he wants to get back to Lilac, and all that. And you get the way that the book ends is that like Unicomp was controlling even the weather. Like that's how powerful this whole thing was. How there could be even people that exist outside of a computer like that, I don't know, but whatever. Those are some of the questions that maybe you don't think about too much, when you're reading the book. But the book ends off more or less with it's raining during the day, as to where, before Unicomp was controlling when it would rain, and usually it'd be in the middle of the night. So, that's kind of the hint that, yeah, Unicomp's power has diminished, if not gone completely. And Wei gets killed. I mean, the whole thing. And Chip, lives on, and you assume that he's going to go get Lilac, and, the world is going to get back to whatever progression that it was on before this technocratic dystopia, before Unicomp took over. So it's a great book, and I really feel that overall the message that the book puts out there, I think, is a fair warning, ironically from 1970, of what, in my opinion, I think that most of the tech giants are shooting for. This is the kind of world that I think Facebook wants to get to. Maybe this is the kind of world that Amazon wants to get to. I think these sorts of dystopias, especially ones that are so, that are very much tied into where the computers are kind of controlling everything, blah, blah, blah. I think that, I think that points at a lot of where these people want to go, and they don't care because Zuckerberg just wants to be Wei, right? And, he'll just live on forever. And, as long as they can have a good time, they don't care that everybody else is just more or less feeding the system. And I mean, it becomes like, again, there are questions that you don't really get answers to. Like, is it just that Wei was just that power hungry? And like, but if so, like, why, what function exactly is the family performing that they're even necessary? Like, are they just creating, I mean, because this isn't exactly explained. I mean, the way that the programmers get to live is very lavish. That's at least described. But do they need the entire planet Earth, or maybe these other colonies and stuff, to be able to just provide this lifestyle for, and you don't get an exact number of how many programmers there are, but there's different councils. So you'd assume, I think you'd say that they live in the triple digits, as far as how many of them there are, at least. Maybe there's significantly more, but is it just a slave species to just prop up what happens, in the bowels of Unicomp? I mean, there's not exactly a great explanation as far as that goes, but overall, I think the direction and the message and the attempts at control, with so many varying things, and maybe it's not drugs, maybe it's, apps on your screen or something like that. Not that they're literally mind controlling you, but that they're keeping you from having, living perhaps a fuller life or having a good time and things like this. I think it's a sound warning. I think it's perhaps even ironic or interesting, not ironic, but interesting. And maybe if I wanted to go really far, I would almost say conspiratorial, that this book was never made into a movie, when maybe it's the most important book that Ira Levin ever wrote. Granted, like I said, kind of unoriginal when compared to Brave New World or some other books of the past, but at the same time, very well done, very well presented, and kind of likely, in my opinion. I think kind of likely. And I wish there was a lot more developed of the philosophy. Like this is a book that could easily have had a very extended edition where, like, okay, so what part of Christ's teaching other than peace, peace at the point of drugging so that you never feel anger or violence, is it just the peace that made it why they always, look so much up to Christ? Marx, it certainly makes sense because it's a very socialist or communist society that exists, that the family exists within under Unicomp. They never talk about who Wood is. I think his name's Benjamin Wood, but they never really describe what he exactly brought to the table. And of course, Way is arguably kind of the head of Unicomp and the main programmer. But they never really explain, like, so what's the whole philosophy here, kind of behind that. But I think you can read enough into it, that these are concerning, that these characters, certainly Christ and Marx, I would say, are very concerning characters throughout history. Even though, while I'm not a communist, I think Marx is vastly misunderstood and maybe even mistranslated, and what he said is misconstrued by opponents. And Christ might not have ever existed. So, concerning figures, certainly, but maybe for all the wrong reasons. Regardless, so I would have liked more of that, but still, I think that this book, and the reason why I wanted to talk about it, as compared to, like I said, in the Sovryn Tech newsletter, I put a full list of all the books that I read through February. I'm not going to cover all of those books, certainly, but this one was important because I think it's very timely. I think it's a book it's a story that's needed now, because I think very much that Zuckerberg is is creating a Unicomp, or trying to create a Unicomp. It's not just Zuckerberg. Like I say, it's corporatism. It's governments and private industry working together. Okay. I think that Google is, I think that Larry Page is very much shooting for a Unicomp. In fact, that's with Larry Page, in Alphabet, it's pretty much explicit, I should say it's implicit, but it's explicit in the products that they have been putting out. Every 10-4 event that they've only held a couple, I guess now, but at their 10-4 events, meaning their October 4th, releases where they release a lot of their new products, which they used to do at Google I/O. But anyway, the scenario that they've laid out of like your Google Home, and I don't just mean the little, cylindrical device, that you're, a Googleized home. How about that? Okay. Requires, here's the thing, like, it doesn't work if only a few 100,000 people buy those products and use those services. We've talked about this. We talked about it as soon as the event happened, because I instantly saw what was going on. For Google Home alone to work, but for the Googleized home, the Googleized life, to actually deliver on everything that Sundar Pichai, promised, that Larry Page has promised, etc. Okay, for that to happen, everybody has to be on board with this. Everybody has to have a Google Home. Everybody has to be using Android. Everybody has to be using, Google Docs or, the various Google services. That's what it takes. Everybody has to be on board with this stuff. Everybody has to be having these things. And we didn't even get into it. I wanted to get into it in episode 266 or 267 of Sovryn Tech. Where I was going to talk about Google Clip, which is that little quote unquote AI powered camera that just takes various shots throughout the day, or various actually they're more like GIFs, takes little mini movies throughout the day. I didn't even get into that, but I will be talking about it in an upcoming Sovryn Tech. But that's the thing with Google, like it needs a Unicomp. It has to have, everybody has to be using this technology and these services to actually deliver what they are promising is going to be the future that they're bringing on. Okay, they've got to be the one. And arguably, that's why Google is so concerned about Amazon, because Amazon is taking this matter on. And maybe Amazon is very much shooting for Unicomp. Arguably, they're the ones that have the infrastructure, right? How much of the internet, how many different apps and services and whatever else run off of AWS? We're talking 80% of the interconnected world. And that's why I think that this book is so important, because it really, and even, while granted, nobody's getting drugged up yet, I think that there is an antithesis. If I were to write This Perfect Day, if I were to write this book today, perhaps instead of drugs, and not saying drugs couldn't be used or that they wouldn't be, but instead of drugging everybody with monthly treatments, I would use algorithms as my, as my plot point, okay, or my plot device. Because algorithms, all this stuff, the concern about fake news and blah, 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 and even something as simple as Instagram not giving you having the timeline be chronological, perfectly chronological, instead it's algorithmic. Algorithms are really controlling what you see. They completely control what you see online. On every service, they control what you see. They control what comes up in search. They control what shows up in your little news cards on Google Now. They control what appears in your timeline or what appears in your news feed on Facebook. They control what appears in your Twitter feed. They control what appears on Instagram. All of these different facets of how you experience the world and how so many people are hooked to experiencing the world instead of just experiencing it itself, okay? Or how they even want to share their world, which may be more important, is all completely algorithmically controlled by a very small amount of people, the programmers. I'm not saying programmers in the abstract, I'm saying programmers more metaphorically, okay? But the people who think they know best for you. So many of these things I think are like, even the incendiary, I would go so far. If I wanted to go with some more wild conspiracies, I'll toss another one on you. Okay. How did Trump get into office? He got into office because the corporatist system needed to test just how well, can we control a wildfire election? And I think Trump might have been an attempt at that, because then suddenly, it wasn't until Trump happened that there weren't the warning bells about fake news, about, what's happening online, memes and like all these different things. Before, it wasn't even a conversation. It was otherwise very traditional. This is something very new. Granted, like I said, I think Zuckerberg is genuinely running for political office starting in 2020. Might not be president, but some kind of political office. But here's the thing, again, you can have the greatest open system in the world. You can have all the world's information at your fingertips, blah, blah, blah. But none of that really matters if you can't get access to it, or if the portals that you go through to get access to it control what you're allowed to see. Okay. So you don't need to drug people up anymore. You can just control their internal narrative algorithmically on these various services. I think the reason that everybody's pushing for AI is because that way you don't need people to actually control what services show up. This is the importance of like machine learning and things like this. AI is such a nebulous term. Okay, we're not talking about Skynet necessarily here. Okay, but that's also, these systems can be, even like, again, why do people do free why do tech giants offer so much free photo storage? It's because they want access to your photos so that they can run it through their machine learning systems and through their algorithms, and then they can control what visuals, what pictures and what visuals, end up appearing here and there, and what they want to block. Just go through your newsfeed, right? Facebook now automatically blocks certain kinds of pictures that they think you might not want to see. That should be very troublesome to people. That's censorship. Oh, you say, well, that's nice that's kind of there. Well, and that's where, you don't need to drug people to where they only have sex to control their sex drive. So they only have sex once a week for 10 minutes. If you stop, which, how many of these services do this? If you stop that, if you can control the sharing of, erotic material, then, you don't need to control people. Like, sex may not be a part of the game so much because of, what ends up being mental programming. No drugs required. So another interesting thing that comes up in this book is how art has really been sterilized. Like, Chip ends up making this buddy. I think it's the character of Chad, who at one point he ends up turning in. But his buddy does this amazing artwork, and some of very erotic artwork and whatever else. But Chip, the way the book describes it, Chip recognizes, wow, this is making me feel things, that like I'm not supposed to, that that his internal dialogue says I'm not supposed to, or his internal monologue, whatever, I'll say dialogue. His internal dialogue says I'm not supposed to be feeling this. This isn't good. This is against Unicomp. And Again, I think that plays more into this algorithmic control of photos, to where, you can keep, if you control art and what art can even be seen. Well, that's a scary proposition, and you're very much that I think that could be argued to be a very real sense of perhaps mind control. Maybe. I mean, that's pushing it a little bit, but it's certainly censorship, and censorship is for all intents and purposes kind of a type of mind control. So a very important book. I'm sure there's other things that I could have described that were brought up within the book that I think point at a lot of what I again, like even just the concept of the smart city and things like this are pointing at, or what China's doing with their citizen credit scores and all this different stuff is really pointing very much at what Ira Levin was writing about 38 years ago. That this was coming. And and it points at the importance of science fiction, because science fiction is what allows us to understand the consistently, especially now, the rapidly changing world, that we've lived in really since maybe like the 40s and the 50s, and it's not uninteresting that science fiction became so popular at the same time that the atomic age starts, right? Because then suddenly, everything's moving so fast that I think the brilliant people in the world, your Asimovs, your Bradburys, Arthur C. Clarke, you go down the list of them, like a lot of these really brilliant guys who are really just kids that grew up in New York, or some of them anyway, not Arthur C. Clarke. But like they were trying to wrap their heads around what was going on, and they saw a lot of positive possibilities, but then you get others who, Ira Levin would come in and maybe, bring on a little gut check to utopia and say, this could be bad. This could be really bad. And certainly it was outside of the literary works too, it was in the film industry as well. At the time, I mean, the 70s was, laying out so many different dystopias. You think Soylent Green, and Logan's Run, which of course originally was a book, but, you kind of go down the list of them. So, yeah, science fiction is so important because it gives our brains, through the medium of fiction, the ability to grasp the ramifications and even the reality of what is going on around us, what is getting developed, what is getting released upon us, what is perhaps getting pushed upon us, as consumers, as individuals, as, pick your demographic. Sometimes these things come to fruition, sometimes they don't. But what Ira Levin put out there, I think, is something that in a very real way is being attempted. By tech giants in concert with governments. I think they would love this sort of thing. So a very important work. I totally recommend that you read it. I recommend that you recommend to other people that they read it, because it's a nightmare scenario that I don't think could be too far. I don't think is too hard to imagine could really be like that could actually happen, especially when you look at what's going on very much today, what gets developed today, and even just the hints at what's happening behind the scenes in Silicon Valley and Washington and everywhere else. So do check this book out. Like I said, it's one that has a message. I'm all for good times science fiction. Like, I love good times science fiction, but I can dig a good dystopian story here and there, and this is one that, like I said, I think is incredibly relevant to today. So do read it. And again, certainly what put this book, because I think after I read it, I told Ellen, I was like, holy shit, this is like one of the greatest books I've ever read. And part of that is because sex was such a central part of this, and a central part of it in that you are, it's a part of the very real individualistic rebellion that goes on with Chip and his friends, cohorts, and whatever else. All right, real quick, I do wish that Snowflake, and this doesn't happen, I was expecting it. I thought it would have been really amazing. I was kind of hoping that Snowflake and Lilac would end up in a polyamorous relationship with Chip. That would have made the book even more ahead of its time, even though I still think the book is very much ahead of its time. That would have been cool. But I love that, and it goes to show that this is, I really personally, I think the sex part, yes, I'm obsessed with sex, obviously. Okay. I make no bones about, but about claiming that I am a sex crazed individual. That's not going to shock anybody. But regardless, I think that when you consider that like conservatism is on such a rise today, and that conservatism, when you put that, like, say, in the light of the book This Perfect Day, like you sort of need conservatism to have a world like the world under Unicomp, right? Which I think people would think that that's weird, that communism and conservatism would work so well together. No, I think that they can walk hand in hand. And this book kind of puts a fictional possibility of that on display. So I really do love it for that, because not enough science fiction does that, where sexuality is part of this, the beautiful, rebellious, and disobedient aspect of the human condition that keeps dystopias, or that fights dystopias and keeps dystopias at bay. So definitely one of, like, the for me, that's what put this book over the top. That's what put this book into, like, my higher rankings, where otherwise I might have just sort of written it off as like, this is Brave New World, like just with an updated point, even though it still would have had great points when discussing Unicomp and everything. But yeah, I mean, boy, you just think of, like, how Google makes everything all colorful and nice, and even, like, you can look at pictures of Google's server farms and everything, and it just smacks the description of what the bulk of the family members get to see at Unicomp. So again, all right, I could keep talking about this book, because I thought that this book was just fantastic. Just go read it. Go check it out, buy it, whatever. I mean, Ira Levin's gone; he's not going to get the money for it, but whatever. Do what you got to do to check this book out. And believe me, I left. There's so many plot points, and there's so much that goes on in the book that I didn't even hint at here. So even if you already know the story, don't worry, because and even though it's kind of unoriginal, like, don't worry, because it's such an enjoyable experience and read. You can still take a lot from it, and when you experience it, you're going to find yourself. I'm probably, the only problem is, like, I want to use Unicomp as, like, a slang now in Sovryn Tech as a term to maybe stop saying corporatist or something like that. I'll just say, we got to stop Unicomp. But I think a lot of people might get confused with the old computer company Unicomp. So I don't know how exactly I'm going to make that work, but I think that there's so many wonderful analogies that you could pull out from this book that you could start to use as like a, in your everyday vernacular when you're speaking out against what may be a very real, like I say, we live in a sci-fi dystopia already, and I think that there are attempts at getting to a technocratic society, if we're not already technically in a technocratic society, whatever. I think that this, using these kind of fictional terms developed in this could be very useful for describing that, kind of like how people use the term the Matrix, right, to describe breaking free from, the mental and whatever other bonds that are holding us down. So I could see it being very useful like that. I would love to see this made. I would love to see this book made into a movie. I'd actually like it more to be an anime. Animated, but obviously with Japanese flair. I would very much like it to be that, because this is a very sexy book in a lot of ways, and you kind of want to, I think you want to be able to put all of that on display and take it to the heights, which, nowadays with Game of Thrones and things like that, certainly nobody minds doing it in live action as well, but I would love to see this made into that. I think that this book is actually maybe more important to get produced onto film somehow than even the Culture series by Ian M. Banks, which the Culture series, of course, is being made by Amazon of all fucking things, and ironically, I'm sure it'd be one of the tech giants that would actually end up making this. I would be intrigued to see if, just like Zuckerberg and Bezos have both recommended the Culture series, be it the book or the fact that they're making the show, I would be interested if Zuckerberg ever came out and said, for this month's book club, we're going to talk about This Perfect Day by Ira Levin. I would that would be just the height of pure irony, and really it'd be sadistic. But anyway, I doubt that's ever going to happen, and maybe there's a good reason. So if he's not telling you to read it, you should probably read it. So, all right, that's it for this book review, and more book reviews to come in the future. Hope you enjoyed this one, and let me know. Feel free to message me, and I'll talk about it on like a Patreon Q&A or something. Feel free to message me what you got out of the book, what you thought of the book, if you have a different interpretation of things, and maybe we can go over them. Or you could come on the live Hangout Q&A and you could talk about, you'd say, yeah, I want to talk to you about this perfect day. And we'll talk about it because you control the content on Patreon, or you control a lot of the content on Patreon anyway. So, there it is, folks. This perfect day, Ira Levin from 1970. You've got to check this out. And even in the audiobook format, the guy that Kevin T. something, he did a dynamite job of reading this. Like, it's an enjoyable listen even in itself. So don't hesitate to do that, or read it. Read the old paperback if you want. That's fine with me too. So all right, I will see you on the other side. Lots of other great content coming out in March, and of course, total thanks to Ellen for even bringing this to my attention. Love it. All right, I'll see you on the other side.